On December 9, 2024, one of the most spectacular volcanic eruptions in recent years occurred at Kanlaon Volcano on the island of Negros in the Philippines, with news agencies all over the world reporting on it, accompanied by the usual disaster headlines. One of course asks, how seriously is it really? When it comes to disaster reports from the Philippines, it's important to remember that this country sits right in the middle of the Pacific Ring of Fire, one of the most geologically active zones in the world. Earthquakes and volcanic eruptions here are as common as rain in autumn. And if it's not shaking or a volcano isn't spewing lava, typhoons are often raging across the island. But unlikely the way Western media portrays these events, the local population tends to view them with much more composure. If you've lived in Cebu City for over a decade like I have, you get used to it. In all that time, I've only experienced about 5 noticeable tremors, and instead of inciting fear, they mostly leave me wondering, did something just happen? The same can be said for the volcanic activity. Currently, there are 24 officially classified active volcanoes in the Philippines, but only 10 of them are regularly monitored. This task is handled by PHIVOLCS, the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology. But why aren't all 24 being monitored, you might ask? The answer is simple: lack of funding. The necessary equipment and monitoring systems are expensive, and the budget is limited. A prominent example of the government's efforts to improve monitoring is the Taal volcano. After Taal showed increasing activity last year, the Philippine Senate is now discussing allocating more resources to PHILVOLCS. It's possible that the current Kanlaon eruption will put more fuel to this debate. Speaking of PHILVOLCS, to monitor natural hazards, they offer an app that tracks the 5 most active volcanoes and other dangers. I will show you how it works for the 5 volcanoes currently being closely monitored. Okay, let's start it. We zoom into the Philippines and you see first there's earthquakes, but let's go to the volcanoes. And you see the 5 active volcanoes which with their daily actual bulletins if they are under observation. And you see Pinatubo, latest was in August 12, 2021, as this volcano is currently not really active. We come to Taal. The latest here was December 10. Let's go over Kanlaon. This is the active volcano at the moment. And you see here December 9 was the eruption, and the cloud was nearly 4 kilometers high. Going over to Bulusan. This one is also a little bit active. And last, Mayon. It also shows some activity, but more to all these other volcanoes later. But we come to the other volcanoes soon. Then we can see current earthquakes that have happened here. And here you can see where Kanlaon is located. Then there's also tsunami issues. Then there we have tsunami warnings in case some are issued, and we have weather and all other information given. So you see, with this app, residents and tourists can stay informed and aware of any potential danger. It's a simple yet crucial tool for living in one of the most geologically active regions in the world. And now to the volcanoes, let's go through them one by one. Pinatubo is one of the most famous volcanoes in the world. Many of you might still remember its catastrophic eruption in June 1991, a natural disaster that dominated headlines for days. It was the second largest volcanic event in the 20th century and caused a global temperature drop of about half a degree Celsius. And for those who have no frame of reference, just 2 years ago the Tonga volcano erupted here in the South Sea. You might remember that one. It had the same volcanic explosivity index VIE as Pinatubo's 1991 eruption, a level 6. And for comparison, the infamous eruption of Mount St. Helens in the US only reached a 5 on that comparison scale. As early as April 1991, Pinatubo began showing signs of increased volcanic activity. In response, authorities established a 40-kilometer, 25-mile evacuation zone, and more than 200,000 people were evacuated, a decision that ultimately saved thousands of lives. Then, on June 15, 1991, it happened. Pinatubo exploded with unimaginable force. The volcanic ash plume rose 40 kilometers into the stratosphere, which is why these volcanoes are called stratovolcanoes. To make things worse, exactly that day Typhoon Yunya passed through the region. The torrential rains mixed with the volcanic ash, forming deadly fast-moving mud flows known as lahars. These lahars swept through valleys, picking up debris and burying everything in their path. In some places, the deposits of volcanic mud were as high as 200 meters, 650 feet, and traveled up to 30 kilometers, 80 miles downstream. The rain-soaked ash was so heavy that many buildings collapsed under its weight, which was responsible for the majority of the 840 fatalities caused by the disaster. Nowadays, a visit to the Pinatubo crater is a must-do for tourists visiting the Philippines. The barren landscape of ash canyons and lahar fields stretching far into the surroundings create an otherworldly, almost lunar scenery that definitely will leave you in awe. Fortunately, Pinatubo has been dormant for years. The most recent official bulletin from PHIVOLCS was issued August 12, 2021, and since then there has been no significant volcanic activity reported. Mayon Volcano is by far the most iconic natural landmarks of the Philippines. It's a classic stratovolcano, just like the famous Mount Fuji in Japan. Its typical conical shape is formed by alternating layers of lava, ash, and volcanic debris. These layers form because the volcano doesn't erupt all at once. Instead, it alternates between less explosive eruptions, which throw out ash, rock, and small stones, and calmer, more effusive eruptions where molten lava flows out slowly. Over time, these alternating layers of material build the classic cone-shaped volcano that many of you will recognize from images of Mount Fuji or, of course, Mayon itself. While these conical stratovolcanoes often have smaller eruptions over extended periods, this doesn't mean they are safe. The fact that their activity is more gradual makes them somewhat more predictable than ultra-explosive volcanoes, but sudden shifts in activities can still happen, and that's where the danger lies. In recent years, Mayon has shown signs of increased activity. Fortunately, these have been mostly small, controlled eruptions with no large-scale threats to local communities. The volcano is under constant monitoring by PHIVOLCS, and the public is kept informed of any potential risks. Thanks to modern technology, any significant changes are detected quickly, giving residents more time to prepare or evacuate if necessary. Thanks to its nearly perfect cone shape, Mayon is often regarded as one of the most beautiful volcanoes in the world. But as we've seen many times in the past, beauty can be deceiving. This stunning natural wonder is also a reminder that power and danger can lie just beneath the surface. So the next volcano you should know is Bulusan. From a geological perspective, Bulusan is relatively young. It began forming about 36,000 to 40,000 years ago inside the Erosin caldera, a massive collapsed volcanic crater. But what is a caldera and how does it form? A caldera is created when the magma chamber beneath a volcano empties after a large eruption. With nothing left to support the weight of the ground above, the rock layer collapses, leaving behind a large depression or sinkhole. If you look at images of Bulusan, you can clearly see the outline of this ancient volcanic structure. It looks like an old mountain range, but inside it, a new volcano, Bulusan. has been growing for the past 36,000 years. Today, Bulusan stands at a height of 1,565 meters. That's a little over 5,100 feet. The long-term danger posed by stratovolcanoes lies in their ability to rebuild themselves over time. If you have ever seen the aftermath of Mount St. Helens or Pinatubo, you will notice they have flat, blown-apart summits. But the small craters we see today are in fact just smaller calderas, the scar left behind after a magma chamber emptied out. Over time, new volcanic structures grow in these calderas, leading to future eruptions. To give you an example of what to expect if such an event occurs, let's reimagine Krakatoa. The infamous eruption of 1883 is still considered one of the most powerful volcanic explosions in recent history. It completely destroyed the original island. The shockwaves from this explosion were heard as far as 5,000 kilometers away, and the resulting tsunamis killed tens of thousands of people. But here's something even more fascinating. The three small islands you can see around Krakatoa today are actually fragments of an even larger ancient island that existed before. A cataclysmic eruption, thought to have occurred around 535 AD, was so powerful that it's linked to the so-called climate anomaly of 536 to 550 AD. During this period, historical records describe a veil of darkness that covered much of the world. The climate cooled so drastically that harvests failed, leading to famine and social unrest around the globe. It was one of the most significant climate-changing events in human history. And yes, Philippine Bulusan Volcano has been showing signs of activity in recent months too. Ash clouds up to 1 kilometer high have been observed. And as mentioned in the beginning, Kanlaon Volcano has shown increased activity over the past months with a steady escalation in volcanic events. This buildup culminated in the most powerful eruption so far on December 9, 2024, when it sent an ash plume 4 kilometers into the sky. The eruption was so intense that it was clearly visible from the island of Cebu, located 100 kilometers to the east. While the danger posed by volcanoes like Pinatubo is widely known, Kanlaon's risk potential is much less recognized. Located on the island of Negros, about 130 kilometers west of Cebu City, Kanlaon is one of the most active volcanoes in the Philippines. Since 1819, at least 30 major eruptions have been documented, with the most powerful occurring in 1902. One of the key challenges with Kanlaon is the lack of in-depth geological studies. Unlike other high-profile volcanoes like Pinatubo or Taal, there is limited information on how often Kanlaon produces catastrophic eruptions. This lack of data makes it harder to predict future activity or determine its eruption cycle. Geological evidence shows the presence of large lahar fields, especially on the southeastern side of the volcano. Lahars are fast-moving, cement-like flows of volcanic debris, mud, and water. These destructive mud flows are often triggered when heavy rains mix with freshly deposited volcanic ash, and they are known to sweep through communities at high speeds, carrying boulders, trees, and everything else in their path. Since Kanlaon has long been classified as an active volcano, authorities had already established a 4-kilometer danger zone around its crater even before December 9's eruption. This 4-kilometer radius is a restricted area that no one is allowed to enter. However, following the December 9 eruption, the danger zone has now been expanded to 6 kilometers. This expansion led to the evacuation of approximately 10,000 residents who lived within the affected area. And PHIVOLCS is even talking of increasing the alert level to 4 and of increasing the danger zone to 8 kilometers, which would affect another 24,000 people. Residents living within this zone are being prepared for a possible rapid evacuation if activity continues to increase. As of now, PHIVOLCS is closely monitoring the volcano's activity. Any sudden changes, such as increased seismic activity or gas emissions, could signal an impending eruption. For the local population, this means being ready to evacuate at short notice. But one volcano is still missing. Let me introduce you to Taal, a truly unique volcano. Taal is a caldera volcano, and this caldera was formed by several massive explosions around 500,000 to 100,000 years ago. These eruptions created a 25 to 30 kilometer wide caldera that still defines the whole area today. But Taal's unique geography goes beyond its ancient origins. Taal is famous for being an island in a lake, on an island in a lake, on an island. If that sounds confusing, it's because it is. Here's how it works. The large island of Luzon contains Lake Taal. Inside this lake is Volcano Island, which is the main body of the Taal volcano. Within the main crater of Volcano Island is another lake, the main crater lake, and inside this lake lies a tiny island known as Vulcan Point. This tiny island isn't even big enough to build a small house on, but it has earned a place in the world's record books as one of the most unique volcanic features on the planet. Confusing, yes, but absolutely beautiful. About 12 years ago, I had the chance to visit the crater rim of Taal, and it was an unforgettable experience. But since Taal has been highly active over the past several years, access to the area is actually strictly prohibited. Taal is one of the most active volcanoes in the Philippines alongside Kanlaon. Since 1572, over 38 eruptions have been documented. These eruptions have varied significantly in strength, with their power measured on the Volcanic Explosivity Index (VIE). The eruptions of Taal have ranged from VEI 1 to VEI 6. To put that in perspective, Pinatubo's 1991 eruption, one of the most destructive volcanic eruptions of the 20th century, was also a VEI 6. This means that Taal has the potential to unleash eruptions of a similar magnitude. Taal is also considered one of the most dangerous volcanoes in the world, and for good reason. Firstly, it's located near the densely populated Metro Manila area, home to over 14 million people. But the real danger lies in the unique structure of Taal as a caldera volcano with a water-filled crater. This combination is a perfect setup for a special type of eruption known as a phreatomagmatic eruption. These eruptions happen when water from Lake Taal comes into contact with magma beneath the volcano. The result is violent. The water turns to steam in an instant, causing an explosive expansion that blasts through rock and ash. Phreatomagmatic eruptions are known for being extremely powerful and unpredictable. A prime example of this occurred on September 28, 1965. On that day, water from Lake Taal entered the magma chamber, leading to a massive explosion. The eruption created a new crater on Volcano Island, measuring 1.5 kilometers in length and 300 meters in width. The explosion sent an ash cloud 20 kilometers high into the sky, with volcanic ash spreading as far as 80 kilometers to the west. The ashfall was so heavy that it covered an area around 60 square kilometers in a layer of ash up to 25 centimeters thick. The heavy ash caused roofs to collapse and pyroclastic flows swept across the landscape, destroying everything in their path. Around 200 people lost their lives during this disaster, a reminder of how quickly Taal can turn into a deadly force. Currently, Taal is being closely monitored by PHIVOLCS. Recent signs of increased volcanic activity, including volcanic tremors, ground deformation, and higher levels of gas emissions, have raised concerns, leading to restrictions on entry and access to the volcano. While it is undoubtedly one of the most beautiful and scenic volcanoes in the world, Taal is also one of the most dangerous. Now, you know how dangerous the volcanoes in the Philippines can be, but should you really be worried? Not necessarily, at least not if you don't live within a 10-kilometer radius of an active volcano crater. The Philippines has a well-established disaster response system. The country's disaster management agencies are experienced in dealing with natural hazards like typhoons, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions. They react quickly when the situation demands it. For all three of the country's most active volcanoes, Taal, Mayon, and Kanlaon, the area directly around the crater is always designated as a danger zone. This danger zone is typically 4-kilometer radius, where entry, residence, and any human activity are strictly prohibited. However, following the most recent eruption of Kanlaon, this danger zone was expanded from 4 to 6 kilometers. This increase was implemented to protect people from pyroclastic flows, fast-moving avalanches of superheated gas, ash, and rock that race down a volcano's slopes during an eruption. These flows are deadly, reaching speeds of up to 250 kilometers per hour and temperatures as high as 1000 degrees centigrade. But what about people living further away? Should they be worried? Speaking from personal experience, I've been living in the Philippines for over 10 years, and in all that time I've never experienced a truly catastrophic earthquake or volcanic eruption. And even if Kanlaon were to erupt catastrophically in the coming days, I would be safe here in Cebu City. The island of Cebu is located about 100 kilometers east of Kanlaon, and right now the winds are blowing in a southeasterly direction. This means that if any volcanic ash is released, it would be carried away from Cebu Island. Things would be very different if the wind were blowing towards Cebu. This would have major consequences, especially for the airports on Mactan Island and the neighboring island of Panglao. Air travel would be heavily disrupted since volcanic ash poses a serious threat to aircrafts. But it's not just planes that are at risk. The biggest danger from a volcanic eruption is the volcanic ash itself. Unlike regular ash from wood or paper, volcanic ash is made up of tiny, sharp-edged particles of glass and rock fragments. When large amounts of such ash accumulate on roofs, the weight increases rapidly. It only takes a few centimeters of ash to cause roofs to collapse, especially in areas where buildings aren't designed to withstand such loads. However, the far greater danger comes from breathing in this volcanic ash. These fine particles are so small that they can enter the lungs when inhaled. Once inside, the ash reacts with the moist environment of the respiratory system, behaving similar to cement dust. It hardens, forms a solid mass, and blocks the airways. People that inhale volcanic ash usually die of suffocation, as the flow of air to the lungs is obstructed. This is one of the reasons why volcanic eruptions are so dangerous to human health, even for those who aren't directly in the path of a pyroclastic flow or lava. But unless you live right next to an active volcano or in the immediate vicinity of its potential danger zone, there's no real reason to panic. The Philippines' disaster preparedness system is robust, and its natural hazard response is quick and well coordinated. And giving the potential volcanic ash hazard, here's an interesting twist. The COVID-19 pandemic now had at least one unexpected positive effect in the Philippines. Since the pandemic, face masks have become a part of daily life, and they now offer a layer of protection against volcanic ash that was missing before the pandemic. These masks do offer some protection against these ash particles. Luckily now, in the event of eruption, people have easier access to basic respiratory protection. Yes, the Philippines sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, and natural disasters are a part of life here. But for most people living in urban centers like Cebu City, Manila, or Davao, volcanoes are not an immediate threat. The most active volcanoes, such as Taal, Mayon, and Kanlaon, are carefully monitored by PHIVOLCS, and evacuation plans are in place for communities in high-risk areas. So if you're planning to move to the Philippines, there's no need to worry too much about volcanic eruptions. As long as you don't live directly next to an active volcano, your biggest risk is more likely to come from daily traffic than from nature's fury.